And we're learning. All right, good morning, conservation partners. Welcome to the August 21st, 2024 State Technical Committee meeting. Our agenda is kind of tight, so we'll get right into it and hand it over to Becky for updates from all of our USDA partners.
All right, good morning, everyone. Jeremy, thank you for that. Welcome to our August edition of our State Technical Committee meeting. Thanks for all of you that made the drive in this morning. And thanks to all of you who are there online with us out in the virtual world. Kind of excited for today. We've got a full agenda. We're going to hear from several of our partners later in the agenda. We're also going to hear from some of our congressional staff, give us some updates on what they have going on, across the state as well as at Washington. And then for me, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of our 24 highlights. Marcus, I hope I don't take any thunder away from you and your team. I'll try and keep them higher cut. But I know that you've got some updates for 25. Don, you and your team have got some updates from subcommittees. So with that, we'll just kind of dive right into it. So as Jeremy said, I am giving the Team USDA updates as far as from our missionary and a couple other agencies. So I'll give a few updates from NRCS as well as the Farm Service Agency and Rural Development. So I think the big thing that I wanted to start off with and share from this last year is just talk a little bit about our accomplishments with the help of many of our partners in the room as well as online. We were able to assist over 550 customers get into contracts this year. Now, we had many more customers that we assisted, but those are the ones that made it into financial assistance contracts or future easement contracts. But I think the exciting thing is just seeing that we're going to have an impact on over 66,000 acres across the state. And then that comes from $16.8 million in federal funding. That's going to be circulated throughout the state, as our customers, our contract holders, they purchase services, they purchase supplies and goods, and then, their contractors and staff go out, to see that economic stimulation. It's really exciting to hear when you think about, those dollars are typically circulated at a minimum of 3 times throughout a community or across the state. So we're talking about, $50 million impact at a minimum. So, again, Marcus, I hope I didn't take anything away from you there, but I am so proud of our team and our partners and the efforts this year and all that we were able to accomplish. And, looking forward to seeing how we can work towards helping even more customers in the coming years. So with that, we are working with the National Ag Statistics Service to do a mailing out to all 3,950 farms as identified through their survey across the state, just to promote our technical assistance as well as our financial programs. I think, it's fair season. That's going strong now. We've got staff out at many of the fairs who are out there to provide that information on our services and programs as, people are walking through the areas. And we're just really looking forward to working with more of our partners out there to see if we can find additional prospects that want to come in, customers, landowners, forest landowners that want to come in and work with us to help improve their natural resources or address any concerns they've got out there on their land. So, if you have any ideas or ways that you would like for us to help reach out to potential people within your organization, please let Tabitha Edwards know. Tabitha, raise your hand so the screen targets over to you. If the owl will cooperate. All right. All right. It's not going to pick up Tabitha, but just know that, she does a lot of outreach efforts statewide. And then you also have your local district conservationist. All right. There's Tabitha in the background. Perfect. And I think the only other highlight I wanted to give right now for everyone is tomorrow tomorrow there's going to be a webinar that talks about how conservation can help tackle legacy phosphorus within our fields, edge of fields, and watersheds. I know that's kind of an area, Don, I think we're maybe looking at delving into, some of this, but the event does start at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And I will work with Jeremy to drop a link to that webinar into the chat. And then also the webinar series that we'll drop in here also has an upcoming schedule for any other webinars that are happening from across USDA or have happened in the past. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, Farm Service Agency. They've got a farm loan program that has some changes coming to it. It's called the Enhancing Program Access and Delivery in the Farm Loan Program rule that goes into effect September 25th. And this is going to result in some more favorable loan terms and security requirements and payment options. Jeff wasn't able to be with us today because he's currently in Texas, where they are doing some national training on this program, and then they've got some statewide training that'll happen for their team later on in September. Also from Farm Service Agency, they were able to wrap up some opportunities in 24 that resulted in about $2 million in funds that were able to go out to different landowners across the state or borrowers, just to help them with some relief payments. So exciting to see that coming in. And then, of course, Jeff mentions here, we've had some extreme weather events that are continuing across the state that are creating, workload and looking at opportunities to help work with landowners to address, any damage that was caused through the flooding of their cropland. We've seen excess moisture conditions. We've had a couple of extreme rainfall events in the North Country during July. And I think we're going to see some presidential disaster designations. So, and then we're also still seeing some residual effects from the 2024 crops, such as strawberries, where we had excessive moisture conditions in 2023. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we had some drought conditions. So for the last 2 weeks of July, the seacoast counties were in a D1 status. And, with that just means that the irrigation water has been flowing nonstop in those areas. Another couple of updates from Jeff. We did see the bird flu or H5N1 virus has found its way into the dairy cattle population. I think everyone's aware it started out in Texas back in March and has spread to about 13 states and almost 200 herds. Mortality is not the issue within the cattle, at least, like it isn't within the poultry, but we do see significant production losses, and there is a lot of concern. So just a reminder that interstate travel is restricted across the state, and that has been in place for 3 months to help limit the spread. As the closest affected states to New Hampshire, they're still a ways away, but North Carolina and Ohio. And then finally, be remiss if we didn't touch on the Farm Bill. I think everyone knows that expired last year. They gave us a 1 year, well, they gave us about a 9-month extension, or 12 depending on the programs, but the Farm Bill is set to expire September 30. It does sound like a new Farm Bill isn't going to happen within this calendar year, but we are still hopeful that we'll see that extension go forward, because I know that affects a lot of our participants, both within NRCS as well as Farm Service Agency and then rural development. So shifting over there, I will shift gears a little bit, talk just a minute on updates within rural development. We continue to see strong response to the REAP program, Rural Energy for America program. Thank you for that. So that's focusing on farms and small businesses. We've had a great response here in the state. And under this program, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a 50% grant for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects on farms or small rural businesses. And the demand has just been incredible. They have a backlog of applications at this point. And a lot of times the program is opened up 4 times a year, and often the environmental review process on their side can take some weeks or months to complete. But again, thrilled to share that the demand has been out there. They had about 10 million to 14 million in request. And they were able to fund out about 4 to 6 million. So exciting to see that happen. Exciting to see that we've got the demand out there. We've got, farms and small businesses that want to improve their energy efficiency, and just ask that, if you hear people talking about this, remind them that patience is required through that. Couple other updates, talking about some of their technical assistance providers. Clean Energy New Hampshire is one of their technical assistance providers for the REAP Energy grants. And they can also assist with many other types of funding, not just the USDA. The New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority has been a provider for municipalities, helping to assist with community development type projects, including workforce housing, job creation, and infrastructure development. And they've also been deeply involved in energy auditing, as well as navigation of funding sources for businesses. And then their third technical assistance provider are also your regional planning commissions. So depending on the year, rural development often partners with them with a regional component to support regional economic development. So sharing those out there. And I know that for us too, we'll also be talking with Clean Energy New Hampshire, as they have some interest in becoming a technical assistance provider for NRCS in addition to rural development programs. And then finally, just one update left from Sarah and her team on program funding. Again, like the rest of us within USDA, we are coming to the end of our fiscal year, and any of their final proposals and applications are getting reviewed and determinations being made. And they are trying to make as many selections and obligations and deploy those funds out there across the state by the end of September to help those who are in need. Jeremy, that was a lot.
Well, you did pretty good, because that section was slated to go until about 9:30.
Okay.
So,
Great.
woo, we're already ahead of schedule. Did you want to see the watershed?
Oh, yes, thank you for that. That was, so backing up to NRCS, thank you for that. I failed to put that in my notes. Just for an update from NRCS as we go into the Farm Bill here, we have submitted a proposal up to our national headquarters to add some additional 12 watersheds in for our source water protection areas. Those in yellow are the current watersheds that we're already focused on. And then those in pink are the proposed additions. So working with headquarters on that, we're not sure if we're going to get that in time for FY25. But if not, then that already sets the course for certain to make sure that we've got them in for 26. Don, did I cover that?
Yep, just a special thanks to Kyra Jacobs and Pierce Rigrod from our subcommittee who brought those
Great.
forward to us. And that brings us from about 19% of the state, which was a limit at 20%. So we're asking for a waiver to go to 24% of the surface area, which would be shown by the 13 in pink.
All right, outstanding. Outstanding. So yeah, Pierce, Kyra, thank you for that and for that subcommittee. Jeremy, thank you for the prompt reminder on that as well.
All right, so that concludes this portion. Like I said, way ahead of schedule here. Ryan Hyde was supposed to join us from Representative Custer's office. I don't see them on here yet. Ryan, if you are there, you want to raise your hand, but I'm not seeing you in here at all. Congressional updates are a little thin this time. Oh, we got a message from Kyra here for the audience here. Thank you for the fantastic support of the New Hampshire NRCS team to protect New Hampshire's drinking water supplies. Love it. All right, so we'll see if Ryan will join us a little closer to his slated time at 9:30. Did not receive a response from Bobby Graham at Senator Hassan's office. I did have some notes provided from Representative Pappas, which I can read to you. And nothing was received from Senator Shaheen's office. So good Representative Pappas says, "Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. We're sorry we're not able to attend the State Technical Committee meeting. I still want to pass along some notes on the work we're doing in Washington. It's been a busy time of years. The congressman continues to work with colleagues on tracking flooding issues for farms across the state. As we've seen, record stormwater surge and historic flooding continues to impact our agricultural sector and small farms across New Hampshire. This is why the congressman was proud to join the state delegation in welcoming over $55.7 million from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for New Hampshire's drinking water and clean water infrastructure upgrades. Well, that book ended nicely. These investments will support essential water infrastructure that protects public health and our bodies of water across the state. Additionally, $2.6 billion in funding through the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund will be dedicated to wastewater and stormwater infrastructure nationwide. With the tireless advocacy of the congressman's colleagues in the federal delegation, we are encouraged to see the progress being made on the USDA RD/NRCS community project funding. These funds provide critical support at the local level for conservation and environmental stakeholders, and the congressman will continue to advocate for these funds to be distributed in a timely manner. As a final note, we're disappointed that the Farm Bill remains stalled. This necessary legislation should have passed last year, and now we're hearing talks of the process being pushed off for another year. While this process has been slow and lengthy, we remain hopeful that we will see a well-rounded final product that serves our New Hampshire communities. Groups like the NRCS State Technical Committee continue to provide our office with vital insight on the needs of the conservation and environmental stakeholders here in the state, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide updates and hear about the great work being undertaken by this committee. The congressman sends his best wishes and thanks you all for your continued efforts to safeguard New Hampshire's natural resources for generations to come. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our office if we can be of any assistance. So those are the notes from, what was this?
Pappas.
Yes.
Representative.
Representative Pappas' office. So we'll see now if Ryan has joined us, and it doesn't look like it. Well, we can probably squeeze him in a little later if he does come on. So wow,
We are.
smashing the schedule. So
I don't think anyone will be upset if we finish early.
there were some changes to the schedule. The Department of Ag was unable to join us today. So we have subbed in Dr. Elizabeth Barakowski, I hope I got that right. Research Assistant Professor for Earth Science Systems Research Center and Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space Universe for the University of New Hampshire. Who is going to talk about the Northeast Snow Survey Study feasibility study. So Elizabeth, are you out there? See you on here.
Yep, here I am.
All righty. I will share your slides if that's all right.
Sure. Sounds great.
Okay, they are up.
Okay, I can't see them yet.
All right, yeah, okay. I'm gonna do that. Working on it.
Okay, no worries.
There we go.
Hey, excellent. Okay, thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me to present at the New Hampshire State Technical Advisory Committee. It's my very first one I've ever attended, so it's lovely to be here. I am the lead PI on the Northeast Snow Survey feasibility study. I'll be telling you a bit more about that project and what we're aiming to do. The slides disappeared and now they're back. Great. So we can go to the next slide. So the Northeast Snow Survey was funded federally through federal appropriations in the Department of Agriculture through NRCS. This was started in fall of 2023, and our overarching goal is mostly to expand comprehensive monitoring of snowpack weather and other hydrological variables across the region. We started with Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and we're also collaborating with New York, who has a pretty robust system already in place. We're focusing on elevational gradients. We have quite a bit of snow measurements that are at lower elevations. However, they're not necessarily everything we need. grid for measuring snow, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the relevance is really important for the impacts of climate change. As a Northeast winter climate researcher, winter is our fastest warming season. We've seen exceptional changes. I think a lot of us have probably experienced those firsthand. And this has impacts on our regional hydrology, and our impacts on forest and wildlife, risk management and emergency response, and also outdoor recreation. So our project, next slide.
I am striking out on this today.
No worries.
Wrong screen.
So our project includes partners from the University of New Hampshire, myself, and Dr. Alex Contasta. We're in the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space. We're also partnered with the Appalachian Mountain Club. They've been leading our interest holder engagement project. This is Sarah Nelson, Georgia Murray, Kyla Phillips, and also we've recently added Braden Lyman on there. The Schoodic Institute is our representative from Maine. They're a nonprofit partner at for the national parks in Acadia National Park, and that is led by Chris Nadeau. He is a climate adaptation specialist in Acadia. Josh Benish is our representative from Vermont. He is the Office of Vice Provost of Research at UNH. He works there. And Anna Grunis is a graduate student. She works in the Summit to Shore project. She's been very much engaged in this project as well. From the University of Albany, State University of New York, that includes Scott McKim. He helps run the Whiteface Mountain Field Station, which is like the equivalent of Mount Washington Observatory, but in New York State. And then from NRCS, our partners include Jordan Clayton at the Utah SNOTEL office, Kara McCarthy at the National Water and Climate Center, and Melissa Webb and Heather Hoffman as well. Next slide. So our process includes basically 3 major steps right now. We have started with interest holder engagement. So we have been talking with folks through online surveys, phone interviews. We've hosted 3 workshops now, and we're now scheduling follow-up meetings to develop the network objectives. So we have an understanding of the basics of why we need this network, but we also want to know what the priorities are across the region. Next slide. So what we've come up with so far, this has been revised as of August 2024. So after all of those interviews, all of the feedback from conversations with folks who have an interest in snow and its impacts across the region, we've divided this up into 5 different objectives. They're not in any particular order at this point, but we'll start with objective number 1, which is to provide real-time data to support flood and water supply forecasting. This is very much in line with the original SNOTEL network that is focused out west, and we want to bring that type of capability to the northeastern United States as well. So that includes supporting the forecasting needs of tribal, local, state, and federal planning, decision-making, and actions responses to those events. As Becky had mentioned in the beginning of the talk, the flooding that we've been seeing is not necessarily confined to winter, but we did see quite a bit of that, the impacts of that in December of 2023. And with a changing climate and a warming winter, we could expect to see more. We also want to provide data to support our understanding of ecosystem and wildlife responses. This is objective 2. So this includes responses to weather and climate events, whether they're extreme events or whether they're shifts in seasonality. We have been seeing a shortening of winter, a lengthening of the shoulder season during spring into the winter or winter to spring transition. We call that the vernal window, and there are impacts on soil carbon storage that Alex Contasta has been studying in farmlands and then also in forests. So we're focused on that as well. A lot of the interest holders have been bringing up outdoor recreation and community access on public lands. This is important as we think about access to trails and how we respond when there's major flood events that wash out access to these centers where people are either recreating or maybe also the responses when there's a emergency response necessary. So that could include flooding, it could include avalanche response as well, limited resources for forecasting in those areas and responding are another one that has come up quite a bit through interest holders. Our fourth objective is to provide ground-based observations for the validation and development of models and remote sensing. We also use data assimilation for river forecasting models, and that has proven to be a really big one, especially with relation to flood and water supply. But it also is important, for myself as a climate modeler, when I don't have any data to validate my model, it's hard to know how well my model is projecting into the future and under different climate scenarios. So this is one that we've been focused on, especially with also remote sensing products. I'm someone who works with a lot of optical remote sensing. So anytime we're trying to validate what's on the ground, we have this really thick canopy cover that obscures the signal, and having more ground-based observations is really just going to be super critical for improving the detection of snow in these heavily forested areas. And then lastly, our fifth objective was to provide real-time data to inform management strategies for working lands. So when we have these flood events on our working lands and we have frozen soils or lack thereof, what impacts are those going to be having into the future? Next slide. In our process right now, we are currently mapping our objectives to measurement needs and any gaps in monitoring. So we are identifying through these surveys and pulling out quotes from our interest holders about what it really needs to be addressed. So for example, the temporal gaps that were identified by flood forecasters included the lack of December monitoring. A lot of the snow surveys that are collecting snow water equivalent measurements don't start until January. So having some December monitoring and automated monitoring would be good, especially the more frequent measurements. Right now, they only go out about every 2 weeks. And other states, like the New York State Mesonet, they have automated snow water equivalent monitoring through a thorium sensor that reports every 6 hours. And that makes it much easier and much more higher confidence in when we can predict when and how big of a flood we can expect to see. So figuring out how fast that snow is going is probably one of the more difficult things that the flood forecasters do, but having more frequent observations will improve that. There are also spatial gaps. We've been hearing from folks who are in charge of groundwater bells that are distributed around the state. Not having a lot of snow data for that is one of the gaps that they've identified. So they would look, one of the folks that was providing feedback for that said that they were looking for at least one monitoring site, I've said state there, for each of the HUC 10 or 12 basins in the state. So that would be an improvement over what we have right now. They also noted that the high tourist areas can create a high water usage that's outsized to the population. So in the event of a snow drought or low snow year, you might see a bigger impact if there's also a commensurate decrease in precipitation or drought. There's also gaps in population sparse elevations at those high elevations, and also the high, again, the sporadic readings that we get at high elevations. Next slide. Go through another example here. This was about the community access. So having emergency response and infrastructure needs for avalanche forecasting. We heard quite a bit from the community about having snowpack conditions throughout the regions in the White Mountains, and making sure that we have sensors at different elevations to help with the forecasting and rescue needs. There was also an outdoor recreation management angle that emerged in a couple areas. We're still working through a lot of these, the feedback, to make sure that we were sorting everything into the right objectives. But one of them was knowing when the next devastating flood is going to arrive and what impact that has on trail management. Easily transferable as well into working lands. When is that flood going to happen? How bad is it going to be? And how can we better predict it when it's related to snow and precipitation? We also noted, there was another person who had noted about cross-country skiing and how the higher terrain holds much more snow and longer and better than the surrounding areas. Next slide. So in terms of our next steps, we're continuing to map all of the interest holder feedback, which there is quite a bit of with each of these objectives, and then find out what the measurement priorities are. Clearly, there's a need for better snow data, but also precipitation is emerging as a really important product that people are very interested in. How much is coming and how frequently? Next slide. We're also doing a data inventory of all the existing snow data. If you were at the in-person meeting, Becky, I believe you were there. not believe you definitely were there. So we had mapped out a lot of the snow collection across the state. And while it looks like a lot of these sites either only collect measurements every 2 weeks, or they are collecting in a very limited sort of scope. So they might only be collecting snow depth and not the amount of water that's in the snowpack. They also might only have one measurement. So a lot of those blue dots that you're seeing on the map typically only have one measurement in time. And it's just simply a hiker who has gone through and stuck a snow probe in the snow and reported it through a community science snow app. So that is ongoing, but it's becoming very clear that there are a lot of gaps that people had noted in the higher elevations and the remote areas that we're really hopeful that we can fill. Next slide. And then lastly, we're also visiting a bunch of field sites to get an understanding of what is on the ground and what works, what doesn't work. So we can go to the next slide. Our field site visits included one to Salt Lake City to see the Utah Snowtell Operations Center. So we visited a Snowtell site in the middle of winter and got a sense of what their instrumentation setup looks like out west. We took a look at their warehouse as well, how they store things, how they're doing data quality assurance, quality control, how much space they need for a state like Utah. They also cover the state of Nevada, so a bit larger scale than probably what we would need in New Hampshire, but it gave us a good idea of scoping out what type of needs we would need here in New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine. And we also got to chat with the Soil Climate and Analysis Network. So Kent Sutcliffe was there, able to talk with us about SCAN. We do have SCAN sites in New Hampshire, but currently neither of them or none of them are reporting snow data at this point. Next slide. Folks that came to our workshop in Appalachian Mountain Club up in New Hampshire this summer, or well, I guess it was early summer in May. We had a field excursion that was part of that. So that included going up to the Mount Washington Observatory regional mesonet sites. These do not collect snow at this time. It's a very challenging environment to do so. So thinking about where would be good sites, good locations to collect snow measurements that are a bit more sheltered and less exposed to the elements. So we've been chatting with Mount Washington Observatory about that. We also got to take a look at the AMC seasonal snow sites. So these included snow cannons, where they're measuring snow, but only on a seasonal basis. And then also a Mount Washington Summit Observatory tour, which was great to see what they have going on up at the summit. And then last slide. Our next upcoming visit is going to be to Vermont and New York. We will be visiting the VUVM Summit to Shore project. This is a Department of Defense funded project right now that is looking to expand snow observations for a couple of field sites near Mount Mansfield and also at Ranch Brook. So we'll be meeting with the PIs of that project to discuss their strategies, what instruments they've been testing out. And we're also going to be going over to Lake Placid to see the Whiteface Mountain Field Station and Mesonet Snow Site, and also the Lake Placid Mesonet Site. So the standard sites for the New York State Mesonet do not measure snow, but there's a sub-network of sites that do measure snow. So it'll be great to meet with the New York State Mesonet folks and get a sense of their operations and talk with them. And with that, the next slide is just my closing slide. So I could take any questions on the project. I'm happy to continue to provide updates on that. And we also have a website if you wanted to take a look at our website. Thank you.
Well, we certainly do have time for questions. So if anybody in the room have any questions? What about our TV audience?
I'll start with one.
All right.
So Elizabeth, thanks for that update. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of this. What is your timeline for the study that you see overall, and what do you see beyond the session there in Vermont, New York? What's after that?
Yeah, so we have a 2-year funding, so we're not yet quite through our first year. Our first year ends September 30th, so we'll be submitting our semi-annual report to the NRCS. We're happy to provide a copy to you if you'd like to have a look at it. We're hoping by November to have all of the objectives mapped out with the measurements and following up with interest holders to ensure that we are making a mapping design that is meeting their needs. So you will likely be hearing from us in the next month or two to chat with NRCS folks about working lands, because right now we have not had any survey responses or phone interviews with people who are associated with working lands. But that was something we discussed at the May meeting. So we have developed objectives with that, but we need to have some more input. After that, for the next year, we'll be working on siting. So deciding, like where would be some really good potential sites? What are the options for a small, medium, and large network? What would that look like? So it's, scoping out how much this would actually cost to implement, and then passing on that information to folks in Congress and understanding what's capable, what is feasible, what is not. We did put in an ask for FY25 for appropriations, and for that one, we're very interested in understanding the variability of snow across the landscape. We do not have the measurements on the ground to make that assessment at this point, so this would require more of a regional modeling exercise. So we would be following the Snow Uncertainty Ensemble project. This is the SOUP analysis that was published back in 2016, I think, or 2019. We would need to update that for a regional perspective and get an understanding of like, where is the highest variance? Where was the largest uncertainties? Is that associated with certain land cover types or exposures, aspects, slopes, information like that?
Great, thank you.
All right, it looks like Kyra Jacobs from EPA has a question. Kyra, you should be able to unmute now.
I did. Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, Elizabeth. Kyra Jacobs. I work for EPA Region 1 in drinking water protection. And I had a question about your slide related to Objective 1. I couldn't tell from the quote that was in, I think was a result of your survey results, if it related to New Hampshire specifically. Here, I can put my video on now. If it related to New Hampshire specifically, but I wanted to mention that it doesn't, I see Steve Landry is on from New Hampshire DES. I don't see my colleague Pierce Rigrod from the Source Water Program, but are you looking for a groundwater survey site well in New Hampshire as in addition to other states, or is it?
Currently, we have only heard from New Hampshire, and that was from New Hampshire Geological Survey. So the DES is not, to the best of my knowledge, has not filled out any of the surveys, but we would love to get in touch if they'd be able to provide us with some feedback on that.
Sorry, my question probably wasn't clear too, but
Okay.
that would be great to get New Hampshire DES involved. But it looked like somebody was saying in one of the quotes you had on the slide related to Objective 1 that you'd be interested in having a groundwater site.
Not a groundwater
So-
site. No, sorry.
Okay.
I should
It said
clarify.
state. It said state, so I
It
wasn't
did,
sure.
yeah, it did. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Sometimes when the phone interview transcription gets in there, it doesn't quite translate correctly. So that was to have a snow measurement site associated with the groundwater wells. So located near them. And that would be automated monitoring, not the manual observations that are currently associated with near those.
Well, all I'll say is if you need a groundwater, drinking water, public water supply, we could probably help you with that if that's helpful.
That would be super helpful. Yeah, I could follow up with you on that.
Yeah, and Steve Landry, I'll talk to Pierce as well. Pierce Rigrod is my counterpart at New Hampshire DES.
Okay.
And yes, I'm related to Jennifer Jacobs.
I heard of that. Nice to meet you.
Very proud of her. Very proud of her
Yes,
work.
doing amazing snow work. She had come to our in-person meeting, so it's great to have her there.
Yeah, and just as an aside to all of us who work in conservation, my sister and I grew up in New Hampshire being outside all the time. And now she's a hydrology professor at UNH, and I'm a drinking water protection, water quality person. So I think that it's very connected, that those of us who spend time outside learn to love conservation and the outdoors and want to protect it.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kyra. Any other further questions out there? Folks in TV land? All right, Dr. Burakowski, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It does not look like Ryan Hyde has joined us, so we are basically at a breaking point.
You wanna go ahead and maybe go through some of the partner talks and then,
I think some of those partners were planning on joining us at the top of the hour.
okay,
So if we could just take the 10-minute break now, and we'll launch into the lightning talks at 9:50.
Okay,
Does that work?
that works.
All right, folks, join us in about 10 minutes, 9:50. All right, it is 9:51. We're gonna move on into the lightning talks. Kicking us off will be Ian Hanley, Executive Director of the State Conservation Committee.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jeremy. And so I'm just going to give some updates and talks on what's happening in the Conservation District space. Last week was a pretty busy week for conservation districts. There was the National Association of Conservation Districts summer meeting down in Boston, which was well attended. And then we also had the State Conservation Committee meeting on Thursday. We had Doug Sagan, the State Invasive Species Coordinator, speak to us about his efforts and how to liaise with him for projects around the state and what his priorities are. So if you're at all interested in seeing that presentation, feel free to just send me an email and I'm happy to send you the link for that. We also met at the new Department of Ag office for the first time at Granite Place, and the commissioner gave a bit of a tour. You know, they don't have a huge office, but compared to the old annex, it is massive. So I was excited to see that and see that now that they're all settled in at the Granite Place office building. Some program notes. First off, on a specific district of note, Carroll County will have their new district manager starting up at the beginning of September. They've been without a district manager for the summer and are really excited about the new manager. So I'm sure he'll be meeting up with Sean as soon as he gets, gets settled in his office, and getting up to speed. Some other notes with the climate resilience grant, we're going to be coming up on the 2025 round, and we anticipate another 300,000 being available for projects around the state. We're not going to see any major changes to that program. It'll be divvied up between the 10 counties at 10,000 as a cap per applicant. And that application round will open in probably November or December. And so right around the time that we're coming up on our next STAC, but that program is still going to be a go for next year. So as you continue to work with people around the state, let them know that that program is good to go. And excitingly, we are planning on working with a legislator. We've identified a prime sponsor for a legislative bill we put in for the next session to help try to get some state funding to create this program into a public-private partnership. So Representative Judy Aaron is going to be the sponsor on that bill, and we're looking at putting that in this upcoming legislative session for the spring. Moose Plate, another good year for Moose Plate. They continue to be up 5% year on year. So the last few years, we've had at least a 5% increase. We do anticipate an additional 575,000 to 600,000 coming into the fund for this year's, or I guess I should say, fiscal 25's applications. As a reminder, those applications were increased to $40,000 per project. Applications for fiscal 25 close on September 13th, and we'll be meeting in November to finalize the recommendations of the grant committee and the SEC approving those at the November meeting. So another exciting year for that. Update on local working groups. We, since we presented the last STAC, there haven't been any major updates. I will say that I have put in a pre-proposal application for a professional development grant through Northeast SARE to help the districts with the facilitation process. So hopefully that will, fingers crossed, get some money to help with just improving the process overall. Just a note from NHACD, the annual meeting will be on November 14th at the barn on the Pemmy. And Steve Capicchio, the president, has been reaching out to numerous speakers from outside the conservation space. He's excited to announce that one of the executives from Lint will be there, bringing plenty of chocolate. But really looking at kind of going outside the conservation space to find people that can help bring fresh perspectives on organizational management, recruitment, those kind of things. So we're excited about that. So that's what I got. Anyone has any questions for me?
Any questions for Ian in the room? Folks online? Looks like you nailed it. All right, up next, Elisa Dykstra, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Biologist, Endangered Species Program for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Elisa, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
We got you. Good.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to give a quick update. I don't have a lot to share, but I was asked to give a listing update for the Endangered Species Act. So there's generally been a lot of delay at the moment. So I'm sure these updates won't be as exciting as you were hoping. As far as northern long-eared bat and other bat species, our updated ESA compliance tools are still in draft. We hope final tools will be available in the near future, but I don't have a timeline because we just don't know. These tools could include, but of course this is subject to change. We're hoping that they'll include a revised determination key for northern long-eared bat and tricolored bat. Potentially tricolored could still be a conference opinion at that point, so it wouldn't necessarily be a consultation, depending on whether it's been listed or not, because that's still pre-decisional. We're hoping to have sustainable forestry management tools, a FAQ document, consultation guidance, and wind guidance documents. So I'm sure you've all heard that before. Essentially, we're just waiting to finalize those reviews and hear what folks have to say about that. So they're not available yet. Some of those tools like the D key can still be accessed in beta IPAC. So you can go and try out the revised determination key in beta IPAC, but it is not in the production IPAC, so it won't show up for use officially in consultations. As far as the listing decisions, the tricolored bat has been delayed and we don't have a timeline. The little brown bat listing decision was postponed a while back. The SSA will be starting this year. That's the species status assessment report. Surveys last winter indicated that the fungus that causes white nose syndrome is present in little brown bats in California. That's all I have for bats. For our other species that have pending potential listing decisions, the salt marsh sparrow, spotted turtle, wood turtle, Blanding's turtle, our timeline officially says fiscal year 2024 for a draft listing decision, but these have likely also been delayed for the same reasons or similar as tricolored bat. And I don't, unfortunately, have more information about that. I do have good news. The Northeastern Bulrush, we published a proposed delisting rule on July 31st. That comment period is 60 days and it closes on September 30th. So we're hoping for some good news for that species. That's all I have unless folks have questions and I can try to answer them.
Any questions from within the room? Any questions from online? All right. Thank you so much, Elise.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're going to move over to Corey Riley next, manager of Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. Who's going to talk to us about some ongoing work. Corey, are you with us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So, am I to share my screen? I have some slides, but
I
I
can
wasn't
share
sure
them
how
from
that
my
happened.
end.
Okay,
Usually works out better to have a co-driver, I think. Oh,
sure.
screen. That's how my
Okay,
day's going.
right.
Uh,
Okay.
There we go. Take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. You can go ahead right to the next slide. My name is Corey Riley, and I work for New Hampshire Fish and Game. And I'm just going to go over really quickly a couple of things that we're doing that might be of interest to this group. I'll be real honest that I haven't been a part of this group in the past. And so if anything I talk about is of interest, just feel free to get in touch with me afterwards. And I apologize if some of the information is too general. Again, I wasn't exactly sure what level of information you'd all want. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to mention that we are, next slide, please. We are, what I am is a part of a federal state partnership. So I work for New Hampshire Fish and Game, but a big chunk of my money comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And NOAA has 30 programs like mine around the country where it's a state federal partnership. We all do some things in common. And the reason I'm mentioning that to this group is because I've actually had the opportunity to work with my colleagues in Rhode Island, and they have a really great partnership with NRCS there around salt marsh conservation. So that's kind of why I'm mentioning that we have lessons learned that we can use from around the country if anything is of interest to you. Next slide, please. So each reserve around the country has some programs that we do in common. One of them is we all own land that surrounds an estuarine habitat. And our lands are wildlife management areas. So there's a subset of wildlife management areas around Great Bay that also have this federal designation as a National Estuarine Research Reserve. And that means that in addition to sort of our education and researching programs, we conduct like invasive species removal, native plantings, and habitat management on our own land. So we both conduct habitat science and then we use that science ourselves in the way we do our own work. Next slide. Another thing that we all do is research and monitoring. So we do field work on salt marshes, eelgrass beds, oysters, water quality, and we also do some upland research as well. That research is both field-based and we also do some geospatial analysis in partnership with Katie Callahan from New Hampshire Fish and Game. Next slide, please. So we also are a place-based program that hosts a lot of education programming. We have a visitor center. We have a really robust school field trip program. And so we are places in the community, which makes us a great place for demonstration projects and also a great way to sort of enhance stewardship behaviors of private citizens in the state. Next slide. We also have a program called the Coastal Training Program that conducts community outreach and engagement. So basically what we do is we really try to facilitate science around estuaries to people who we wish were using that science to make different decisions. So that could be community conservation commissions or planning boards, or it could be local businesses or other natural resource agencies. And we do a lot of work to sort of collaborate with partners to make sure that we're kind of presenting really high quality information and really kind of building a community of practice around any issue that can increase the vitality of our estuaries and our habitats and water quality. Next slide. So this next slide is just showing a couple of bullets of examples of ways that we have been working with NRCS down on the coastal region. So all of our work is really around coastal habitats, but we work pretty closely with NRCS on land protection partnership, on developing and sharing best practices related to stewardship on coastal lands. And in particular, we always work with NRCS when we're developing science and technical assistance to support restoration and land protection. So next slide. I'm just going to talk really briefly about a couple of things that hopefully you might know about, but if you don't, I'm just going to kind of skim over them and you can get in touch with me later. So the Nature Conservancy updated the Coastal Watershed Conservation Plan in 2021. And this was like a really extensive geospatial analysis that had a lot of technical advisory input from around different agencies and experts in the coast. And what I wanted to point out is that the plan includes both conservation focus areas that are important to water quality and habitat and wildlife connectivity, but it also includes priority agricultural resources. And our partners got together not only to create this plan, but then also led a pretty large collaborative outreach effort over the last year and a half, 2 years, to make sure that communities in the coastal watershed know about the plan, to give them technical assistance in how to incorporate it into their own local conservation plans or planning documents or master plans, and to make sure that the maps were easy to use. And we created a website to help people kind of understand the plan and use it in their own communities. Next slide, please. We've also been really interested in salt marshes, in particular in our region, and that has a nice link to sort of climate resiliency interests across federal agencies right now, and the highlighted interest in salt marshes due to the salt marsh sparrow decline. And so I just wanted to share a couple of things to make sure if this is of interest to anybody on the phone, you know that we have this information and we really want people to use it. So one thing that is of high value is we have really high resolution tidal wetland habitat data. The image on the left shows sub-meter accuracy habitat data for salt marshes in the coastal area. That is based on 2014 aerial imagery and satellite imagery. We are redoing that this year, and we'll be conducting a change analysis, which is really exciting because it's going to get really fine scale changes in tidal wetland habitat for all of New Hampshire marshes. The image on the right just shows in purple the migration corridors that are predicted to happen. As you all probably know, salt marshes are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise, but they are able to migrate inland if the surrounding landscape is amenable. And so we have conducted 2 rounds of modeling using different refinements of data from the region to model where marshes might migrate in the future. Next slide, please. Another example of information that we have developed down at Gibner that could be of interest is we combined high resolution habitat mapping data, field collection data, and high resolution LiDAR data to really hone in on what elevation different salt marsh plants thrive in New Hampshire. So the x-axis is blurry here, but actually has different salt marsh species, and the y-axis is the elevation that they range that they do well in. This is really particularly important to restoration practitioners where the planting, the elevation tolerance is pretty narrow for some of these important high marsh plants. So you want to make sure you're planting them in a place where they can thrive. Next slide. We also have a couple of geospatial type of tools that we have developed in a really collaborative process. Again, I want to thank, there's been a lot of different partners on this, and in particular, Katie Callahan at New Hampshire Fish and Game and Rachel Stevens have been leading these efforts. This one was a big effort that lasted about 4 years. What we did is we had a method of delineating marsh units for every marsh in New Hampshire. So there's 221 of them. And for each marsh unit, we assessed their current condition, vulnerability to sea level rise, and adaptation potential to give them different scores. The scores have, each score has several metrics, geospatial metrics that are related to it, and then an overall resiliency score. All of this is available on a viewer. And the cool thing about it is by looking at combinations of vulnerability and adaptation potential or current condition, we came up with sort of a matrix to help as a screening tool for management options. So for example, if a marsh is in great condition, if it's got a great migration space next to it, then it would be a high priority for conservation. In contrast to a marsh that is in poor condition, is highly vulnerable, and does not have a good migration corridor, that may be a great place for an experimental restoration technique. And one of the nice things about a geospatial tool is with salt marshes, often the marshes that are studied or restored are the ones that we can see from the road. And so this gives us a little bit more of a objective view across all of our marshes in the state. Next slide, please. And this marsh can then be combined with anything that a local community is particularly interested in. This slide is showing a bit of a project that we did with the Hampton Seabrook Estuary Alliance, where they had a list of parcels that were either in the salt marsh or adjacent to the salt marsh that they were interested in conserving. And they wanted us to combine our resiliency scores with salt marsh sparrow data and their priority parcels to help them sort of prioritize how to do landowner outreach first, and how to phase that. So that's just an example of how we can take some of the geospatial tools and really customize them for what a particular community is interested in. Next slide, please. I also just wanted to highlight a project that we've been working with NRCS on over the last year, which is basically really digging into these marsh migration pathways. What we did is we led a series of different workshops with people who are interested in salt marshes in our region, and to figure out what geospatial criteria and what field considerations and practical considerations we should be thinking about as far as where to kind of really focus effort on migration corridors. Then we built this viewing tool that incorporated all of those criteria for people. So this includes things like where are their ditches, where are their Phragmites stands, where are their large parcels. And then this map shows the migration corridor in purple. And one analysis that Katie did for us was called a landform resistance analysis, which combines LiDAR data with land cover data to kind of show you that within that migration pathway, how easy would it be for salt marsh to actually get into that area. So for example, it's a lot harder for a salt marsh to migrate inland if there's a dense forest cover than if there's agricultural land. It's easier for a marsh to migrate inland into agricultural land. So this analysis just kind of gave us additional information about where we might be able to focus efforts. The polygons that you see drawn on there are shown because we had a big participatory mapping exercise where all of those partners came together and kind of thought about where they already had an interest in working, and also where all of this geospatial data was sort of pointing people as far as where we should be working. And that resulted in sort of a list of around 18 areas around the coast of New Hampshire where people felt like, wow, we could have a big impact on helping to promote the persistence of salt marshes into the future in these areas. And NRCS is a really important partner on this because most lands in New Hampshire are not publicly owned. And so we have to be working with private landowners in order to do this. And this could include things like, you know, kind of facilitating marsh migration through different mowing patterns or vegetation removal, or even changing the slope. But it also could be just straight up land protection projects. So, and some of this information was used in the I know for the recent SELT RCPP application. So, next slide. That was a whirlwind tour of a couple things that I thought might be of interest, and the most important thing here is to reach out with my email if you're interested in learning more about anything that I just spoke about. So, thank you very much.
All right, Corey, thank you. Any questions from within the room or our online audience for Corey? Oh, looks like Kyra has a question. Go ahead, Kyra.
Of course, I have a question. So, Corey, it's really nice to meet you. I'm Kyra Jacobs with EPA Region 1, the Drinking Water Protection Program. And I just wanted to say that in the past, we've collaborated extensively with the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I've been to your, to the Great Bay, I think we call them NRCS. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate. We work really closely with PREP, Piscataqua Region Estuarine Partnership. And one thing, I think the best area for collaboration between the partners here and the work that you're doing is with the coastal training program. So what we learned about 15 years ago with NRCS and with our drinking water partners at the state is that the coastal training program that, as you mentioned, does obviously training, it's because estuaries are influenced so much by what's happening further up in the watershed. You can help us get the message out to municipalities and residents about how we can protect drinking water supplies. So, for example, the Piscataqua watershed includes the Salmon Falls River. It includes many drinking water supplies. So I'd love to talk to you more about the work we've done with Chris Fort at the Wells Reserve and Annie Cox, who's now at UNH. Annie's now at PREP. So I'll follow up with you directly, but Annie spent 15 years with us at the Wells Reserve doing the coastal training program.
Yes, and we partner with Wells, like, and Annie. I mean, I work with Annie almost every day now. And so my coastal training program coordinator does almost nothing without Abigail being involved. So it's in the coastal region. It's like we have so much overlap with these technical assistance professionals. So I'd be happy to talk more about like how to strengthen that, or if there are key messages that we can help
Yes.
carry forward. Great.
Now that would be great, because I also think that an under-tapped resource is our own estuary programs at EPA. So even though we fund PrEP, EPA does, I have to keep reminding people to promote drinking water protection, because as we like to say, it is one water, and that's the message that I think even nationwide has really become more important. Like, we can't say it's an estuary and not think about drinking water,
Right.
and not think about Steve Landry's big tent at DES.
Mhm.
Steve's on the phone, so I wanted to say that. But also that, instead of just shunting stormwater to get it away from the estuary, well, how do we infiltrate where we need
Oh,
it? Because as Becky just pointed out, we have droughts. So it's all one water, and we have to manage it that way. And so it's really great to hear your presentation, and thanks for inviting her, Jeremy. We appreciate it.
Well, don't act like it was my decision.
Nice to meet you, Kieran, and super interested in how you work with Eric Beck, but we can talk about that later to integrate more with PrEP, because I've been really involved for a long time. So
All the time I integrate with Eric.
good. Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions, Steve, I think I'm gonna push you back just one time, and we'll go over to David Burdick and Greg Moore, and stay in the salt marsh, if that makes sense, if they feel. All right, so you'll be after them, so, Greg and David, joining us from UNH, Jackson Laboratory. Is that correct?
Thanks, Jeremy. Happy to be here. Happy to get as much involvement from NRCS as we can. I'm going to speak for a couple minutes, and then Greg's going to take over. So I think you have our slideshow. And,
That is correct.
We have a lot of people working on this group called SMART Teams. It's the Salt Marsh Adaptation and Resilience Teams. And it's just a loose affiliation of scientists and managers and contractors who are trying to restore marshes in the best way possible, because we've realized, just when we thought marshes were going to be able to take care of themselves, sea level starts to rise, and we start getting into trouble. Next slide. And the origin of this trouble is usually hydrologic in nature. So the first part of my career, I've been working on getting rid of tidal restrictions. This is the Browns River in Seabrook. And if you look at that stream, one side of the railroad, it's not like the other side of the railroad. And it's pretty obvious that there's some big impacts there. So I've been working to get those tidal restrictions removed because the marshes really need the water and the sediment to build an elevation. But I didn't realize that we also need to work on the surface hydrology. See, marshes used to have a dendritic pattern of single channel. So each spot in the marsh would flood and drain from one place, but surprise, surprise, next slide. It turns out the first marshes in New England were the first farms in New England were salt marshes. And all the salt marshes in New England were farmed, every one. And we have a very poor record of this, and we don't know what was farmed completely. And we don't know how much was farmed, but we have records from Nova Scotia to Florida of just looking at the landscape and understanding the patterns. And so once we start seeing the patterns in the landscape, we see these patterns everywhere we look. This is one image from 1720 of repairing a dike. So this is not building a new dike. In 1720, they were repairing a dike. So a lot of this work happened in the 1600s. Like I said, the first farms in New Hampshire and New England were salt marshes. And in the mid-1800s, they got very technical and quite good at this, using these structures to drain the water out of marshes and to terrace the marshes so that they could grow just about anything in the highest terraces. Next slide. And we see evidence of what's left. So there's some water control structures on the right and the left. And the one on the left is still in the marsh, still working. Well, not as a water control structure, but as a conduit. We found 3 of these structures in this marsh in northern Maine. And you can see that picture in the middle shows an embankment because we have Juncus gerardii growing on it. So that plant likes a little bit higher elevations. And so you sort of can see, if you look around marshes, I can't look at marshes anymore the same way as I used to, because I just see all the structure now from the farming. Next slide. And one of the interesting things is, once we started to record these things in paintings and photographs, farming had changed totally. So it was really moved to farming only for their livestock. And so they're just really cutting salt hay around the middle of the 19th century, so the middle of 1800s, somewhere in the middle there, they really kind of switched over just to cut the hay and not build these terraced embankments and control the water quite as much as they did for this process. Next slide. So what's happened since? So what we see is the multiple ditches, we call it, multiple channel hydrology of the ditches in the red circle. They're over-oxidizing the peat. They're 4 feet deep, 5 feet deep, and it's dropping the elevation of the marsh. The orange circle shows where those ditches got filled in by nature. And so, but it filled all the ditches in, and now it's not drained at all. So it's undergoing soil waterlogging. So it's losing elevation because there's no, as the plants die off, most of this marsh is built by plant material. It's peat. And if the plants die, then the peat decomposes and you lose the elevation that way. So both these things are happening. Next slide. And when you have that happening over big areas, you can just see this in this photograph too. So you have the overdrain side of the marsh, and then you have the underdrain side of the marsh. And you can see all those embankments. All of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, well, this spot side. Yeah, this is obvious. But these are all over the marshes. It's just they're not quite so obvious. So we're losing elevation of the marsh surface. We're losing stored carbon, and we're screwing up the remaining endemic habitat for organisms like the salt marsh sparrow, which is on our insignia. Next slide. So we have a 4-step process to address this. And one is getting rid of those multiple channels of those parallel ditches to one another by filling up the bottom, healing the ditches from the bottom up to within 20 centimeters, 30 or somewhere between 30 and 10 centimeters of the surface. Then it's going to stop doing that over-oxidation problem. And in the over waterlogged areas, we're finding ways to drain them using very shallow systems. Again, so we don't overdrain the marshes, we're just shallow draining them. And so that's the idea. And our 4-step process is halting subsidence and increasing plant productivity, while at the same time thinking about wildlife and thinking about adaptive management. Next slide. So I'm going to leave you and pass you over to Greg. I want to show you one of this. This is a soil waterlogging pool that was about 8 acres in size in the Great Marsh in Massachusetts. And that orange line at the top corner is the shoreline that's shown in the right photograph. We put runnels in this marsh. Greg Moore and I put runnels in this marsh in 2014, winter and spring 2015. And the runnel we added in 2015 really helped drain this. And in 8 years, you can see it's not a pool anymore. There are still pools in it, but it's really changed. And we're trying to take these ideas and pilot a bunch of different sites in Fairhill, Philbrooks Pond, Hampton Ditch. And Greg's going to talk to you about a project around in Hampton Falls. So I'm going to pass it over to Greg.
All right, thank you, David. Next slide, please. All right, well, David really set it up perfectly for me here to sort of show how we're bringing these ideas for management right into the Seabrook or the seacoast, New Hampshire, the Hampton Seabrook estuary that you see here in the foreground. This work is funded by a NIFWIF grant that David and myself and Allison Eberhard are the PIs on the project, and we've got an awful lot of project partners. And I'm really excited today because so much of what we're planning to do is really going to depend on this growing collaboration we have with you all at NRCS. So next slide. So super briefly, there was a lot of goals of this project that spanned Massachusetts and New Hampshire that included dunes and marsh platform work, an innovative sediment addition pilot project, sort of like a thin layer placement, as well as assembling coastal managers. But we're going to just focus on, next slide, building that resilience of the marsh platform in New Hampshire seacoast. Next slide. All right, so, essentially a lot of the work that we do involves some pretty intense field monitoring. And you can see here on the left, that's David. They're not taking a nap, but actually measuring sediment accretion using a sediment elevation table. And of course, he's sitting on that bleacher aluminum board so that he doesn't compress the marsh. So the scale of measurement here is so fine that we really need to understand really super micro level accretion patterns. We're setting up water level recorder stations all throughout the seacoast. And on the right is a picture of a type of runnel that we've been using very effectively in Massachusetts and are proposing in New Hampshire, which is known as a compaction runnel. It's a very low impact technique that really just compresses the marsh surface in areas of vulnerability and doesn't require the use of heavy equipment, and usually the permitting is minimal or non-existent. So we're really trying to understand accretion rates, understand hydrology, and then reconnect saturated sites into this, as David mentioned, these one-channel hydrology concept. And the thing that's really exciting about it, and I think that one of the images David had just shown, is that the benefits are not limited to just the draining or partial draining of a pool, but it actually cascades beyond over to the marsh, the pool apron, right, of the marsh, that is now also draining better and creating better conditions of pore water chemistry, which we track very closely, and carbon storage. Next slide. Just as a side note, that sensor network that I just mentioned is open access and available. There's actually 5 sensors in place. This image only shows 4, but this is real-time data that you can get at these 5 stations within the Hampton Seabrook Estuary, and you can find your own home and figure out the elevation of the tide that day at your actual home address, and you can backtrack, look back at data as well to understand patterns of flooding on your property. So we've been sharing this with homeowners and agency partners whenever we can. Next slide. And I know that David had showed a picture of the 4-step process. I just wanted to show another one that's sort of earlier on. So the upper left, it was a pool, a large mega pool, multi-acre pool. And even a year after runneling, you can see that on the bottom left, the white quadrat squares, we were actively monitoring how plants were colonizing these now partially dried areas. On the right, if you can follow the time sequence there from top to bottom, those are ditches that we perform ditch remediation, and sure enough, those are real photos at those actual sites. Within just a few years, we really healed those from the bottom up, and it was a really exciting thing to see. And there were actually increases in elevation even on the aprons or banks of those systems. So it wasn't just the creek bottom coming up, but there are benefits even at the edge, which was a really exciting surprise. All right, next slide. All right, so the types of things that we're monitoring at any site that we do ditch remediation or runneling is pore water chemistry, which is critical to understanding changes in the system. Obviously how the vegetation responds, not just percent cover, but what types of plants, and that ties back into some of the slides that Corey showed, that very unique signature of elevation that some of these plants need. We're also doing nectin surveys in all of our pools that we're working in. We're also doing passive acoustic monitoring in them as well. Surface elevation with RTK, so we can understand how sediment accretion is playing out, and SETs that we showed earlier. And then, of course, our lab, particularly Grant McCown in our lab, is doing really exciting UVVR analysis on the pools to really demonstrate the benefits. And that's shown in the sort of upper left picture where you see vegetation coming into those. That is the very pool that David had showed earlier that looked almost completely vegetated today. Next slide. And so to kind of bring it back to where we are today, this is a site in Hampton Falls, and really through NRCS's leadership and relationship building, we are now talking with landowners like New Hampshire Forest Society and New Hampshire Audubon to engage their interest in us looking at runneling and ditch remediation on their properties. And it's something that really wouldn't be possible without the leadership and outreach that NRCS does and what they bring to the table. So we can't express enough how excited we are to be partnering with you on this, and we'll be hearing more about this in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions at this time for Greg or David? Nothing from within the room. What about our folks online?
So I will add, just as you're queuing questions, that the resiliency scores that Corey presented are very much part of our site selection, and I can't say enough about the importance of that work and how useful it is for all of us as scientists and practitioners. So big shout out to Corey on that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. And at that point, I think we'll move over to Steve, who's in the room with us, ready for forestry update.
Sure, yeah, I was asked to fill in for Jeff Fuji. Jeff at the Nature Conservancy, sorry. Jeff couldn't make it today, but PNC has put together a program they call Climate Resilient Forest Management. And so it's very similar to Climate Smart, whatever you want to name it, with the idea of testing out, demonstrating some new practices in forestry to just really buffer for climate change and really either kind of move our forest along or change our forest through management. So the goal for this project was really to facilitate kind of shared learning from different partners across the state in two different landscapes. The first landscape was the Green Mountains of the Conway area. They have a preserve up there. And the second one was around Surrey Mountain in Surrey, New Hampshire, down the southwest corner of the state. And so engaging with NIAX, which is the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, UVM, UNH Extension, TNC, New Hampshire Fish and Game, the Forest Society, New Hampshire Audubon, the Harris Center, and Tin Mountain Conservation Center. Those were the partners that were involved with that, with their associated foresters and biologists. And really, the first steps were to just gather and through a series of workshops and share ideas about forest management and incorporate some of those practices into planning or into actually forest management plans so they can move forward and manage their own properties within those landscapes. So not only on TNC lands, but also on Harris Center lands and things like that. The next goal was to essentially implement those forest management plans and to put those practices on the ground. And several of those partners were able to do that in a short time period, actually. So the Forest Society, Tin Mountain, and Nature Conservancy were able to actually adapt some of their management and incorporate some of these climate resilient forest management practices on their properties over the past year. And then moving forward, they're going to be monitoring that work just to see what the results were on that. And Tony D'Amato at UVM, you may be familiar with a lot of his work with the adaptive silviculture for climate change work that he's been doing here in the Northeast. He has a lot of great sites, including the Dartmouth Grant, Green Mountains, and actually the Surrey Mountain Preserve actually have established plots to monitor this work that's out there. And then these sites moving forward will be available for demonstration for landowners, for foresters, for folks interested in learning about these practices. And the idea will be that the data from the monitoring will be able to kind of say whether or not this is a good idea. And so tying into kind of my work with extension and also the funding I received from NRCS, we had a CIG looking at forest restoration work. I was able to kind of tie in two practices, and I think Gabe will speak to this later as well, looking at using slash walls to protect regeneration and to essentially accelerate regeneration as well. And so that's one way of adapting for climate change is getting secure regeneration, desired regeneration on the ground, and growing very quickly. And it's specifically focusing on oak. Oak is a winner in climate change as we move forward. So there's been two of those slash walls were put in on the Green Mountains of Conway. Not a high deer load area, but certainly there is a noticeable difference between inside the slash wall and outside, just after one growing season. It's pretty interesting. And then the second thing, up at the greens as well, we were able to do some beach control work. There's a really heavy infestation of beach in the understory. The beach leaf disease is yet to really dominate up in that landscape too. And so the idea was to clear that understory so that other regeneration can come in as well. And so that the trees or the forest moving forward wasn't just a solid mat of beach up there. And so we did a couple different techniques to demonstrate how to control beach. And kind of moving forward, we're not quite sure where that's going to be relevant at this point just because of beach leaf disease, but we do have some good takeaways about just controlling undesirable vegetation out there that I think we can incorporate as well as some of the NRCS practices, but also for practitioners moving forward. The two sites that we looked at, again, the Surrey Mountain one, not only did we look at the adaptation work going on the Surrey Mountain Reserve that PNC owns, we also looked at some other forests. The Forest Society just recently wrapped up a timber harvest focusing on actually increasing softwood cover and also focusing on species that were kind of winner of climate change moving forward, so kind of pushing a site more towards oak. And then we looked at a banana conservancy site that actually had some old deer fencing installed that actually the NRCS paid for in 2014, I believe it was. Looking at the impacts of deer browse on our forest, and it's just night and day, the difference between browse levels and speed and diversity that you see inside the deer fencing and outside. So inside you have species like pink cherry, paper birch, red oak. There's chestnut seedlings that are planted in there doing okay, and then outside of it is just a kind of a wall of beach, and so it's kind of interesting to see the impacts they have out there. And then the Green Mountains site, not only did we tour the Green Mountains work that was there recently, it was work that was done on Tin Mountain land, looking at just again really just increasing tree vigor, tree health, forest health. And then on the Moat Brook area of the U.S. Forest Service in the Mountains, they're actually looking to restore fire regimes up there too. So it's really interesting to see prescribed burns. They have a planned burn for 600 acres out there, which is pretty massive if you think about it. Their new prescribed fire person comes from out west, so 600 acres is nothing for them. A little scary for us out here, but that's what it is. But overall, it's been a pretty, I would say, kind of being roped into this. Hats off to TNC and Jeff Lugy for coordinating this work. It's been really great. It's a nice kind of cohort that we have, organizations, partners moving forward, and we definitely have some other ideas about kind of planning other workshops and demonstrations. Gabe was involved in the last one that we went through, and so happy to answer any questions about that. And so that was kind of the hopefully I did just some justice in terms of describing that program.
Excellent. Does anybody have any questions for Steve at this point?
Steve, what's the focus of the planned burn? Is it species regeneration, diversity, or?
It's a little bit of both. It's actually, it's within the, it's right on the edges of the forest as well. So there's a lot of condos and just development in general. So part of it is fuels reduction.
Okay.
And this is a site that was historically burned too, both by indigenous populations, but it has burned in the past as well. So it's not just the northern hardwood type, but it definitely has a lot of pine associated with it. So part of it's fuels reduction, part of it is kind of just promoting a different forest system as well. Okay. In beach control.
Excellent. Any other questions for Steve? All right, hearing and seeing none, we're gonna move over to our last lightning round talk. Olivia Saunders from UNH. Olivia, are you with us?
I am. Hi,
Fantastic.
everybody.
I have your slides. Would you like me to show them?
That'd be great. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Saunders. I work with UNH Cooperative Extension. And so I was asked to talk about our new farmer program and some of the climate education work we've been doing. So you can go to the next slide. So just real quick, we offer an annual course for new farmers, people interested in starting their own farm. It's 8 weeks long and it's hybrid with some sessions on various farms around New Hampshire. There's a online platform where we share resources, study materials, homework, other resources from you guys. And we always try to invite one of the either local offices or someone from the state office out to one of the in-person sessions so that the new farmers can learn about what NRCS practices are out there and how to connect with their local service center. So we had Mike and Alex from up in the Conway office join us last week. And we saw some of the practices they've funded on the farm we were at. Looked at a 20-year-old fence that was still in great shape. So shout out to the engineers in building good, long-lived fences. So yeah, this class that we do, we love it when our partners promote the class. Often you might be meeting with a new farm or someone that just has a new piece of land. They're not sure what to do with it. This is a great way for them to kind of learn more about their land, learn more about agriculture in the state, learn more about what resources are available to them. So we're not necessarily teaching them how to farm, but we're teaching them kind of about resources in New Hampshire, who's who. There's a whole session to meet agricultural service providers. You can see there at the end. And so often we get referrals from local NRCS offices and other partners. This class is offered annually, usually around this time of year. And so people can sign up for it, get on a wait list at any time for it. Go to the next slide. There's also some great resources on our extension website. If it's not, August and you were working with a new farm, there's some sort of perennial evergreen resources on our site. And so I just put the link there and shared a couple of those fact sheets. These are some of the core materials that we use in the class. And really trying to kind of marry what their land looks like to what, their vision of farming is, and talking about, work-life balance and all that stuff. So there's a workbook developing a values-based vision for your farm that we hope the students work through by the end of the class. It's like 20 or 30 pages long. So it's quite a lot to fill out, but it really does help with their kind of mission and vision of their farming operation. I also wanted to share that I think you can go to the next slide. Not sure if I have it in there. No, that's okay. You can go back. We got funding through a BFRD grant, Beginner Farmer Rancher Development USDA program, to support hiring a beginner farmer coordinator position. So that person will administer the class, kind of organize the site visits, get the online material up. And we're going to be adding on a module for climate resilience into the curriculum. So I'm not sure what that will look like just yet, but it might be another module at the end, an additional session. So that's exciting for us to have someone dedicated in that role. That will be a 3-year grant funded position. And so we have a draft job description up, and that's going to be moving through HR. So you'll be seeing that probably out soon. But that's very exciting. We haven't ever applied for a BFRD grant, so we are glad we got it. So yeah, that, if you go to the next slide, that kind of moves us into some of the climate resilience work we have been focusing on in extension the past year. So everyone is probably familiar with all the flooding that we experienced last year, and the frosts and the freezes and all the sundry things. So this is the center is a crop field from last summer. The one on the left is up here in the Saco River district. That sand was not put there on purpose. That was a result of a flood in a hay field there, some pasture. So we know that farms are dealing with the climate crisis quite astutely. And so we wanted to do a series, you can go to the next slide, on, educating folks about the future of the climate. I think initially when I started talking about climate adaptation on farms, people sort of struggled to say, oh, I don't think I'm really doing any new things or anything for climate resilience. But once you start talking to them, they really are doing a lot. And so we worked with 4 different farms to highlight sort of different aspects of climate adaptation. We had NRCS partners, I believe, at every one of these, which was, which was great. There was local NRCS folks. So thank you again for that partnership. A lot of these climate things we're talking about are funded practices through you guys. So really nice to be in partnership with you all on this work. You can go to the next slide. Just some of the things that we wanted to highlight through the series. Of course, soil health, no-till, reduced tillage, super important. I think we've definitely highlighted that one a lot. Growing in controlled environments, looking at, the roads, how water moves through a system. That was our event at Barker's Farm. And then last night, talking about disaster preparedness, emergency preparation in the event of some kind of disaster, be it a flood, a freeze, power outage, etc. And so that was last night. That tipped off the last of the series. And I think you can go to the next slide. So what's next for us? We did that series, talked to a lot of people. I think we'll continue that. We're continuing having those conversations with our farmers. But this topic of disaster preparedness and response, I think is pretty important to us, especially given last year and our sort of, we haven't been trained on responding to disaster. I think as a state, and certainly not as extension, there was a lot of questions that came up from all the flooding regarding food safety or regarding roads, just any number of things that were sort of new to us. And so we have a 3-year professional development grant funded through SARE that will begin in October. And we're going to have a summit that will convene this winter to kind of go over lessons learned from last year, where we can improve what we learned from that whole process. And then we'll have a course, online course that will launch next year, training service providers on disaster response. Like, what is your role? What are the questions that arise after a serious disaster event, such as a flood, such as a drought? What do our partners offer that we need to be trained on specific to that, so that we can help farmers better in that event. So that's that, like I said, that'll be coming up in October. So we're excited about that. And I think that's pretty much it for me. Love working with you all on this topic. Really great to be in partnership with you on all this climate work. So happy to connect more after if this is of interest to anyone.
Awesome, Olivia. Thank you so much. And you got some great stickers behind you. And I see the I Dig Healthy Soil one back there. So I'm pretty proud to see that out there. Does anybody have any questions for Olivia in the room, online?
Olivia, I know your beginning new farm program is pretty popular. Has there been any discussion about maybe trying to add another session to that annually, just as we still see new producers coming in or new people coming into that realm?
Absolutely. And I think that will definitely be in discussion now that we will have someone dedicated to the role. I think the issue is just staff time to organize it. It's usually organized by a field agent such as myself. And so that could be an opportunity. We do it twice a year. And I think that was one reason we created those evergreen resources on our site. There's also like some webinars about, opening up new land, for example. So yeah, continuing to build out some of those online resources if you missed the August, start date for the class. So yeah, I think we'll be thinking through that as the new person comes on board.
Standing. Thanks for sharing that, because I know a lot of our team makes reference and refers people over to your programs and resources.
Yes, and we super appreciate that. We typically get around 25 people in the class, which is kind of where we like to keep it. We don't want to have more than that, just for student success and being able to work with them each. So yeah, that is a limiter.
Awesome. It looks like Damon Me has a question for you. Comment?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Olivia. Thank you for both your beginner farmer work, but also the work on the climate resilience and connecting it to a lot of the NRCS practices. And I just want to encourage that we'd like to continue that discussion more. I'd certainly like to, and really build on expanding the understanding of those connections between resilience and our practices, as well as, our focus from the Inflation Reduction Act funding has been a lot on climate change mitigation, but there are a lot of resilience and adaptation benefits of our practices as well. So I think let's continue to build on that connection.
Would love to, Damon, would love to. Yeah, thanks.
And one other comment we had here, Elizabeth Burkowski would like the link to the resources. I did provide the link that was on one of your slides, but I'm not sure if that is correct.
Yes. Yep, that's the one that has the links to a bunch of other stuff. So that one works. Thanks, Jeremy.
Fantastic. All right. Looks like that's the end of our lightning round. Thank you to our participants. It was truly electric. Right? So thank you all for that. We're going to move on into new practices and subcommittee updates by Don Kierstead and his team. Don, are you ready?
Yes. Thanks so much, everybody. I want to say thanks to all our partners out there on the call, and thanks for taking the time to prepare these lightning talks. I really enjoyed them. A bunch of us in the room really were as well. Your work is so important to us to kind of continue our mission here at NRCS, and we're really trying to listen to you and hear your priorities and understand how we can react with our Farm Bill programs and our staff here to kind of make a difference in New Hampshire and a number of the things we're hearing about today. So I wanted to provide you kind of a looking forward here presentation. As you know, we're getting ready to turn the calendar over into our FY25 fiscal year. And part of that is to take a look at, what kind of new practices or what tweaks we can make to our programs. And so we've got kind of a lightning talk of our own here with a number of staff here you'll hear from. And this is really an awareness level presentation. So you'll just get little snippets of a lot of new things going on. I'll kind of do a little spoiler here that lots going on in agroforestry. So you're going to hear a little bit about that, and lots going on about water, as Olivia mentioned, others mentioned, Elizabeth, flooding, too much water, not enough water, these kind of themes. A number of the wildlife restoration species and habitats we talked about on some of the lightning talks will be in here as well. So without further ado, I'd just like to turn it over to Kelly to get us started.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Kelly Bolin, the state biologist for NRCS. And I don't know if you could advance the slide. So I'm going to give 3 topics on wildlife. And I think we heard quite a bit about the salt marsh restoration and the potential listing for salt marsh sparrow coming up by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we've been working with partners a bit and going out into salt marshes. And I got an opportunity to meet Greg and a few of the other partners and go out there and talk about opportunities to do some work to help salt marsh sparrow get above that rising tide and So we have a couple practices we have adopted and maybe could use a little bit more: wetland restoration, wetland creation, and wetland enhancement. These are 3 practices we think could be really useful in salt marsh. I'm happy to hear some of them are pretty simple to do, the runnels, and then and some might, maybe in the future, we can look into how to use these more. Also, I got a shout out to the Wetland Reserve Easement Program, because I could see some opportunity here for that. All right, next. All right, switching gears to pollinators here and wildlife, more upland. Wildlife habitat site preparation and new interim standard. So the issue we had with creating meadows and pollinator habitats generally has been, we have one practice and the landowner needs to do all of the steps before the payment could come for wildlife habitat planting. This adds in a step for the preparation. So that will allow this to be more stepwise in terms of using funding for the landowners and less of a burden to the landowners. Also, previously we're restricted to not using herbaceous weed control on cropland, but this preparation technique can be used on any land use. So that can also be useful for our landowners. Next. And then some partners brought up the potential to use beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures to increase floodplain roughness, re-engage floodplains to their streams to their floodplains when they were incised. And this is a technique that's really low technology, just hand tools, getting wood posts into streams and weaving it with willow, kind of like a natural fence. Not necessarily to pull beavers into an area, but to just create that, mimic what a beaver might do on a landscape. So we're creating a working group to look at how this can be used in New Hampshire. We do have a CSP enhancement for this, and we're working with Connecticut River Conservancy and a few partners on this potential activity in New Hampshire. Yeah. So thanks. I think that's it for me.
Good, next.
Hey folks, can everyone hear me?
Yep, I got you, Gabe.
Hi, so I'm Gabe Roxby. I'm the NRCS forester for New Hampshire. Just have a couple slides here with some updates and new items from the forestry world. So Steve Roberge mentioned earlier about beech leaf disease. So just a little background, NRCS currently uses the brush management 314 practice to provide assistance to landowners treating either invasives or beech in areas where it's an impact to the diversity and development of a forested stand. We are starting this fall, we're going to be pausing our assistance to chemical control of beech due to the issue of beech leaf disease. So you can see the map there on the right. Beech leaf disease really was only first found in New Hampshire in 2022. It was found 10 years ago in Ohio and sort of pretty rapidly spread. You can see it was just a handful of towns in 2022, a handful more in 2023. And then this year, every time I go in the woods, I'm seeing it. So it is a super rapid spread. Over 80 towns at this point. This map is a few weeks old. It's maybe up to, it's maybe even more at this point. So there's a lot of uncertainty and concern about how beech leaf disease is going to affect our beech. And so we're just going to be pausing, funding chemical control of beech. We're going to leave the door open for sort of exceptions to that in certain instances, maybe in areas where beech leaf disease is not already, or if, there's sort of a long-term plan. We're sort of leaving the option open for exceptions to that, but in general, we're going to be pausing that until we know a little bit more about the impacts of beech leaf disease. Next slide. Another sort of area that we're looking at is how we can assist landowners in areas where deer browse is an issue to the success of forest regeneration. Steve mentioned providing assistance to landowners that are interested in installing slash walls in areas where they're doing regeneration harvests, and there's a high deer pressure. So we're looking at starting that as well, offering that to interested landowners starting this fall. I have spoken with several consulting foresters who indicate that this would be of interest to a few of their clients. So we're excited to start offering that and looking into developing guidance, areas that are good fits for this, and then the sort of specifics that we would require for landowners, signing up for this. We'd be looking at doing that through the 612 tree and shrub establishment practice. It's people sometimes think of that as planting trees, but it's actually doing things to establish, regeneration. That can be, artificial regeneration such as planting, or natural regeneration, which this would be facilitating that. Another sort of related option that sometimes foresters and landowners use is when they're doing a timber harvest, leaving the tops of trees large and difficult for deer to walk through. So sometimes people call that slash blankets, or just leaving the tops large. And we're looking to whether we can offer that this fall through the 384 woody residue treatment practice. And so we'll be working that in the next month or two to see if we can roll out and provide those options to landowners. Next slide. And so, getting back to some of these climate resilient forest management techniques that Steve mentioned earlier, there's an increased interest in supplemental planting in our forests. I think if you wound back the clock 10 years and asked people about planting trees in the forest, they'd maybe give you a funny look, because trees just grow back in our forest. Our forests are very resilient. If you stop mowing your lawn, you're going to get a forest in 5 years. So why do we need to plant trees in the forest? But there's really been a surge of interest in this, and from the standpoint of how can we better prepare our forests to be adapted and resilient in the face of a changing climate. And one technique that there's a lot of ongoing research about is supplemental planting of species that are underrepresented on the site as a way to increase diversity, or perhaps at the northern edge of their range as a way to just put more eggs in your basket when you're managing your forest, so that you have more options if a disease or issue comes in. And so we'd like to, support landowners with an interest in this. And so we'll be offering that and developing guidance on this through the 612 tree and shrub establishment practice. And in areas, you can see the photo here, in areas with heavy deer pressure, we'd be looking to protect those seedlings as shown. And we're not, and so some people talk about assisted migration and planting species from really far away. And that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about just providing a little nudge for species that are almost on the site already, or perhaps are in the surrounding area, just as a way to diversify our forests. Next.
I'll take it from here, Gabe. So as was mentioned before, agroforestry is something that it has been popular for a while and is growing in popularity even more, especially as maybe some thoughts for climate change resilience. And there is this detailed definition, but essentially working trees for agriculture and people. And it's something that we have kind of lightly supported in the state with other practices that we have offered. But this year we are just going ahead and adopting the rest of the agroforestry practices that NRCS offers. And we are, Gabe and I and Don are working with surrounding states to come up with consistent guidance so that we can kind of all be on the same page across the region as much as we can be. So there's consistency across the states. Go ahead, next slide, please. So I think the one that we hear most about from producers is silvopasture, and we had some discussion about this on the Ag Subcommittee, and there's a lot of discussion about this practice from interested producers. And so one thing to keep in mind is this practice that we offer is an establishment practice. So establishment of desire or management of desired trees and forages in the same area. And that management in there is like managing the stocking rate of the trees down to an acceptable level, not necessarily the future management of silvopasture with the animals in there. That comes through other practices. So we're really trying to focus this on work with knowledgeable and motivated landowners. It is a tricky practice to do well, oftentimes. And so there are two ways to go about it, kind of two directions: planting into pasture, planting new trees into pasture, and often shade is a desired goal of this. And then thinning and establishing grass. So I think there are a lot of possibilities with or a lot of interest, especially in the thinning or going into established stands from our producers. However, many of them don't realize the amount of thinning that's needed to make a successful silvopasture. They have kind of a different picture in their head, maybe just put fence out around a forested area and let the animals in. This is different. So we want to make sure there's clarity and education around, on the producer side, so they understand what we're talking about when we do say silvopasture. Planting into pasture is maybe a little less desired because often folks are looking for more area to graze their animals rather than the perceived less area with some trees. But we do see some good possibilities here in New Hampshire with degraded, invaded, low value stands if animals are in the woods already, and then anywhere that we can, if people are interested, planting trees into fields, but keeping in mind that there may be some impacts of endangered species or at-risk species. So with that, I will pass that along to, I believe Chad is next.
Hey, yes. Good morning, everyone. Chad Cochran here, New Hampshire NRCS state agronomist, talking about alley cropping, which is another agroforestry practice. Kind of on the flip side, like Damon mentioned, that there's a lot of interest out there in silvopasture. Alley cropping is one we're really putting out there and seeing what kind of interest we can generate with it. It is the idea where we're starting with cropland, which is a little different than some of the agroforestry practices where we start with forest, but we're starting with cropland. And we are essentially adding trees or herbaceous plants to it. Typically, they are fruit producing or nut producing of some type. Plants that we're adding in rows, can be a single row, can be multiple rows. And the idea is that we're adding some vertical structure to our typical croplands, being able to grow more, capture more sunlight than we would otherwise. And we're continuing to do cropping in between those rows. Cropping could be hay production all the way to annual vegetable production. Kind of everything in between could be done in between those rows of herbaceous plants. So we are, like Damon mentioned earlier, working regionally to try to put some sideboards and guidance on what we're doing here. And we're really interested in getting feedback from the local farmers on how they see this working. So far, I think, the small organic permaculture type farms, this could be an excellent fit. And we're looking to build that out in partnership with New Hampshire NOFA as well. That's all I have. Pass it on.
All right, you've got me again. So the third agroforestry practice that we're going to talk about today is forest farming. And so what we're talking about here is typically you've got a forest and you're managing for those timber products that the forest can provide, but you're also managing understory plants or non-timber forest products in these areas. So it's an integrated way of managing both of these. When you talk to people that are interested in forest farming, some of the common understory plants, just to give you an idea of what they're talking about managing for, usually includes things like ginseng, golden seal, ramps, bloodroot, as well as something like mushrooms. A lot of those herbaceous plants are fairly rich site requiring plants. They're sort of more commonly found in Vermont, but in some of the richer soils that we have here in New Hampshire, especially on the western part of the state. And so this NRCS practice can either be used to manage the overstory of these areas to provide the necessary amount of sunlight and growing space for the understory plants, or for planting some of the understory plants or trees in these areas to optimize the way that these two are being managed together. Some of the potential issues that we might run into when trying to plan this practice are that some of these rich site plants are rare in New Hampshire and tracked by the Heritage Bureau. So when we work with producers, we're going to have to be careful to steer clear of any issues related to, we don't want people to be planting, rare plants and impacting the genetic pool that some of our native rare plants have. So we're going to be steering clear of those issues, but working with, as Damon and Chad mentioned, working with our counterparts in the Northeast to come up with some guidance and sideboards to make sure that these projects we get involved with are having a positive impact. I'll turn it back over, I think, to Damon.
Thanks, Gabe. So in addition to the agroforestry practices that we're adding, there are a couple of interim practices, which are practices that NRCS is just trying out, that we are going to bring in to the state at least for a few years to give it a try, see how it goes, and we kind of report back to headquarters on our observations of the practices and if they should become a full-blown practice that's permanent. So the first one has a lovely name, Strategic Harvested Forage Management, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're saying, huh, what does that mean? But essentially it's bale grazing, and we do currently offer it as a CSP enhancement, but this is an EQIP practice and can be planned through EQIP now. And so the real goal of it is to spread out winter impact. During wintertime, winter feeding areas can get some concentrated nutrients and impact that make for some potential resource concerns. So doing this in an intentional way, choosing the right spots, spreading out the impact by putting bales out and rotating the animals through to graze, and then not coming back to the same spot twice in the same year are kind of some of the important key parts to this this practice. So yeah, so we will be offering that, and then one more with a fun name, non-ruminant livestock outdoor management of vegetation. So we this one is kind of a long-awaited parallel to our prescribed grazing practice, and it's intended to help with the management of non-ruminant animals, as you can see in the title. And so the overall goal of this is to manage the animals in such a way that we really maintain ground cover. That's kind of the primary goal, so that we can avoid the resource concerns that come with bare soil and concentrated nutrients. We have been providing some technical assistance on moving pigs around in the past, but we are going to be able to help with some funding to help with this management. A little nervous about it and interested in hearing some good feedback and experiences with it if anyone has any. But I will be working on putting together some pretty clear guidance on this, how this practice should be done between now and the end of September. So I think, yep, back to Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. We just wanted to highlight one other agronomy practice that we're pretty excited about, which is called soil carbon amendment. It is essentially adding a carbon source as an amendment to our soils. It is under the umbrella of a soil health practice. So the idea here being that carbon is the kind of main fuel limiting nutrient within our soils for our soil ecosystem. So think about like fungus and bacteria that live, call the soil home. It is limiting for them. The only way they can get it is through really photosynthesis and then plant materials entering the soil. So we're trying to accelerate that process here, and we're doing that through two main sources. One being compost, and that's something that's not necessarily new to a lot of farmers in New Hampshire, but we're excited that we can now offer compost additions through this practice and through our program dollars. The second is biochar, which is relatively new out there. It's not brand new, but it is exciting again that we can offer it. And biochar is a very stable carbon source. It creates a lot of porosity within the soil. So I think Olivia slide there showing the issues farmers have been having with essentially water problems on their fields. Biochar and compost, we're often thinking of doing these things together. They have a tremendous impact on the way that waters infiltrate the soil. So if we have too much rain, water can drain down through the soils better. And they also have great water holding capacity. So they're able to hold on to water during dry periods and provide that to plants for plant growth. So not only are they good for our soil biology, but they're also great as a climate mitigating factor. So soil carbon amendment is available through our funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is fantastic. And we're trying to kind of push the gas on this a little bit this year and get this out more across the state, including trying to utilize it in manure pits, adding biochar specifically to manure pits as a way to get the biochar spread out onto crop fields in large quantities. I do want to point out that compost particularly can be seen by some growers as a nutrient source. We don't really look at it that way through this practice. We look at it as something to help build soil structure, but we are paying attention to the amount of phosphorus that we're potentially adding to our soils through compost, and we do get testing done on all these materials. So that's it from me.
All right, we've got probably gonna give you 2 or 3 more minutes for the tech shop here, so if we can move it along so we don't run over too much.
All right. Well, I'm an honorary member of the tech shop today. I'm the state conservation engineer.
And they are happy to have you.
All right. Yeah, morning, everyone. I wanted to talk about bank protection. We've had some emergency issues, as you can see here. And just to kind of highlight that we have kind of two approaches when we deal with infrastructure. Here we look at doing something a little bit more hard armored with a little lower risk tolerance. And then next slide, Jeremy. We've got, and then in an agricultural setting or a forested setting, we would recommend more of a bioengineering, more of a plant-based approach, root wads, bog structures, things like that. So we still maintain kind of that dichotomy of approaches for our bank sites. And there've been a lot of discussions this year about permitting, about timelines. We're actively engaging with all kinds of partners through our emergency programs. That first slide was emergency. This would be more of a farm bill application. So that's kind of the summary of what we've been working on this year for bank stabilization. Next slide, Jeremy. Back to the water theme, irrigation reservoir has been kind of a rekindled practice and stemming from the 16, 20, and 22 droughts. Here our objective is to find a spot that there is either an existing reservoir that we can expand and catch more runoff and more rainfall, since we're seeing more of those two things. Typically want to locate these facilities low on the landscape and take advantage of impervious surface runoff or snow melts, things like that. But the object here is not so much to pump more from groundwater sources and deplete any aquifers. It's to really focus on surface and rainfall, surface runoff and rainfall. Next slide. And then the last practice that I think is being reemphasized is in response to flooding, doing subsurface drainage, which has long been a practice that we do in the farmsteads and barnyards to manage the water table and to improve soil strength. Here, we're looking, more for a crop benefit and also access. You can see, obviously, in this picture, there's been a lot of rutting, folks just trying to get in to manage crops and they can't do it. So there's some challenges here, as with all of our practices and where we outlet this water, but this is an eligible practice and we're seeing more interest in this as there's more runoff ponding in fields and causing crop damage. If it's a wetland site, I'd refer folks to the soil scientists to talk about wetland delineation, but these are obviously active growing. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight with drainage. So we can do this practice and we are doing it and we're seeing more interest. That's all I got.
All right, and that'll do it for our tech shop here. If you have questions, please hold them to the end. We should have a few minutes for questions coming up at that point. So at this point, I think we're gonna have to catapult it right over to our programs team, who has looked very deeply into the crystal ball of fiscal year 2025. They're gonna take us for the ride here.
You can just jump us ahead to slide 3 when you get it pulled up there, Jeremy. So thanks, everybody. So I'm Marcus Munis. I'm the Assistant State Conservationist for programs here in New Hampshire. I wanted to give you kind of a quick, probably like a spoiler alert, like Don just did with the tech shop, but there's going to be a lot of new funding opportunities in FY 2025. We're expecting kind of a big influx of Inflation Reduction Act dollars, just like we saw in FY 2024. And what's different about this year is we're also going to see a state allocation for easements for Inflation Reduction Act dollars. So that's a big difference. Last year, that was a national competition. This year, and we didn't receive, nothing was picked up in the national IRA easement pool for us last year. But this year, we're going to be running a state competition with some dollars specifically set aside for New Hampshire. We're also going to see we're going to see likely to see some expanded opportunities with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We did receive five new proposals there, and we're expecting to hear on those later this year. We're going to continue some of the good things that we did in 2024 too. Act now for our forest management plans and other planning for our technical service providers, which allows us to quickly fund planning opportunities and get things into contracts for all these different expanded kind of financial opportunities we have for our ag producers and non-industrial private forest landowners. The continuous program enrollment is is really similar on the easement side of things. It's allowed us, I'm going to toot New Hampshire's horn and the easement team's horn a little bit on this one, but we were able to enroll. We had some of the earliest enrollments in the whole country. We're able to get those dollars locked into future easements in New Hampshire using this continuous program enrollment process, and kind of expecting the same thing here in 2025. One other kind of big picture change is people are probably more used to seeing kind of one funding round come out at a time. We're gonna stack some multiple opportunities up, recognizing that there's a lot of funding out there, and we're gonna get some people are gonna be ready early on in the year, and then through additional outreach, we're gonna be bringing people on throughout the first half of the year, looking to still close up and leave time for our planners and our field staff to really work with producers out in the field during the growing season and early fall. With that, I would be turning it up. Let's go next slide to our RCBP coordinator, Jessica Rock, but she's out sick today. So I'm going to kind of cover our RCBP updates here before I turn it over to the easement team and our EQIP AMA and CSP program manager. So this year we received 5 partner proposals for RCBP for $53 million. So those are dollars that normally wouldn't come out of like our state allocation. By submitting those proposals, partners are actually going to bring in dollars from the national level, and they're going to add on to what we have here in New Hampshire. So we'll see what like we haven't heard yet which ones are going to be picked up, but there is an abundance of funding because there's a lot of that IRA dollars out there to help fund these proposals that have been submitted. It was really cool to see that in 2024. It's been a few years since we VP proposals, and we got quite a few this year, and are expecting some of them to be picked up for sure. Next slide. So we have two existing RCVPs that are going to be open again in FY25. One of them's the Regenerative Agriculture for Western New England. The lead partner on that one's the American Farmland Trust, and it is a multi-state project that's targeted at soil health and terrestrial habitat. The other project, next slide, is the New Hampshire Source Water Protection Project. That one's the lead partner is the Merrimack River Watershed Council. New Hampshire is the only state involved in that project. It's open to the whole state, and it's focused on aquatic habitat and stream bank restoration. Next slide. So between those two projects, they're already in there. We've had multiple signups in past years before. And in 2024, we're expecting to obligate about $4.5 million associated with the AFT project, and almost $2 million in easements with the New Hampshire Source Water Protection, and another $400,000 in change for land management contracts with those two projects. And then next slide. We're getting towards the tail end of those two RCVP projects. There's only about $380,000 left to support land management projects with the Regenerative Agriculture for Western New England, and about $1 million between the land management and entity held easements for the New Hampshire Source Water Protection Project. We're looking forward to trying to wrap the available New Hampshire funding up for those two projects in the next fiscal year, and make some room for hopefully what we're expecting to be new projects next year. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brooke and Tracy.
It's a slide. So I just have a few updates for ASEP. We held our easement subcommittee meeting last month. There was just mostly a general discussion of some of the geospatial information that we use in ranking, mainly around the source water protection areas. And so I was happy to learn that we're looking at updating those layers in consultation with the, New Hampshire DES. So, whenever that is approved, then we can just simply adopt that for ASEP as well. We're not proposing any changes to the ranking criteria, anything significant anyways. Moving into the last year of the Farm Bill and our main concern really for the easement programs is ensuring that we have enough applications to consume all the funding that we'll be receiving under the general ASEP with the IRA state allocation. So just a little pitch for, getting those projects to us for folks to apply. And, I'm excited about all the work that's happening around the salt marsh restoration and all the RCPP. So, there is a lot of work coming our way, and it's pretty exciting to be a part of it. And then the last update from the subcommittee meeting is the wetland restoration criteria and guidance document. Again, for those who aren't familiar, this is a document that's developed at the state level to address how we're going to, implement the program. And so just a few revisions there to add some clarification around where we would do tree cutting near to wetlands. Looking at addressing forest health concerns, and then, to promote carbon sequestration. So, realizing that we can't just let these areas be completely set aside from the rest of the easements, and that sometimes we need to go in and manage them more than just to improve wildlife habitat, but these other concerns as well. So I think partners were happy to see some of that in our guidance. And that is all I had to update, and I'll pass it over to Tracy.
Great, thank you. Next slide. Oh, okay, good, we're up there. So, as Mark has already mentioned, we're, for the ASAP program, New Hampshire historically is got general allocation for ASAP funds for agricultural land easements and wetland reserve easements. And this year we're going to have a IRA ASAP allocation as well. So I fully echo Brooke's comments about getting the word out there to applicants, potential applicants to come and see us, talk with our staff as soon as possible so that we can take advantage of these funds. In terms of, I'll point out ASAP general, I guess we'll call it, that's will be, implemented the same way it has in the past, with a continuous selection. Application cutoff dates will be October 4th, and then again, December 20th. Keeping in mind, at least for ASAP General, that this is a continuous enrollment process, and we definitely encourage people to get their applications in by October 4th. But don't wait until December 20th to submit another to submit an application. Submit it as soon as you can when it's ready, even if it's earlier than October 4th, because the IRA, the focus of the ASAP IRA is on the climate focus, as all IRA funding is, and it's not eligible for this continuous enrollment process for enrolling projects over a minimum threshold score, as we are moving forward with those. Anything that's submitted and considered for IRA funding will be batched based on these scores. So based on these dates, I'm sorry. And they, so my recommendation for folks is our recommendation for the best opportunity for all of the various funding sources for easements, get your application in as soon as you can, or as soon as it's ready. And if it, that December 20th date is there in order to, if there's still funds available at that point, then those will be ranked after December 20th, and then they would be considered for funding next fiscal year. Just make sure I covered everything I needed to here. I mean, I guess the one thing I will point out, the continuous selection, there's a minimum, the point of continuous selection for the ASAP General, and that's for WRE as well as the AO, is to select, to keep the projects that are the highest that meet our program goals moving forward as quickly as possible. So we want to make sure these funds are spent in New Hampshire on good projects. So I think that's all that I've got.
We're gonna jump to Stephanie here.
Stephanie, are you with us?
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm Stephanie Tidwell, the State Program Manager for EQIP, CSP, and AMA. You can go ahead and advance the slide, Jeremy. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of many things that you have heard already from the tech shop and from Marcus. We're going to look back for just a minute and give you a summary of what all we were able to accomplish with fiscal year 2024. So for our AMA program, we had a total of 13 contracts covering 44 acres for $191,000. You'll see CSP there. On the right side of the screen, 130 contracts, over 17,000 acres, and about $3.3 million obligated. EQIP, we had 423 contracts, 11.2 million, and 48,000 acres. So that brings us to a grand total of 566 contracts, $14.8 million, and over 66,000 acres that we were able to put dollars towards increasing conservation over the next several years through this through EQIP, CSP, and AMA, and those are Farm Bill and IRA allocations combined. Next slide, please. So for fiscal year 2024, I wanted to highlight what we did with our CPA, DIA, and SEMA applications and explain a little bit as why that it's important and how it's going to tie into fiscal year 2025. So we had a total of 139 contracts and just under $700,000 in funding obligated for 25,000 acres. And you'll see there on the larger chart on the screen, the practices that fell into that. So we had a lot of our, I'm not sure what, just, there we go. Thanks. So we had a lot of our, some of our energy assessments, designs, nutrient management plans, forestry management plans, practice designs, implementations, grazing management plans, all of those things. And these are really important because a lot of our management plans allow us to set ourselves up to establish a relationship with a participant that will then carry over in our subsequent future years for additional contracts and additional conservation that will help us with our funds allocation moving forward into FY25, FY26. So we've made a concerted effort in 24, and then we are continuing to do so into 25 to really focus some funds through this specific funding pool. Next slide, please. So looking forward, what does all this mean for fiscal year 2025? Well, as you've heard some of my coworkers discuss, we have our climate smart ag and forestry targeted funding. So we do have that core practice list. 50% of our total allocation must be targeted to livestock. And historically, we've had a difficult time meeting those targets in New Hampshire. So it's a really good place we could do some outreach there and help us to ensure that we are meeting those required targets. There are going to be energy opportunities, including energy efficiencies that are available through IRA. As you heard our resource team discuss a few moments ago, there are a lot of additional conservation practice options and scenario options that are going to be available for fiscal year 25 that we have not seen before in New Hampshire. And we are anticipating above average allocations that were very similar to what we saw this year in fiscal year 2024. Next slide, please. So back to CPA, DIA, SEMA, for fiscal year 2025, these will be processed under our Act Now authority, which is an accelerated program flexibility that allows us to process and immediately pre-approve applications that meet or exceed our established threshold. So again, like you saw, similarly on the previous screen, we have those conservation planning activities, design and implementation activities, evaluation and monitoring. So our forestry management plans, grazing management plans, soil testing. And as I said, these are used to create management plans, prepare and design implementation requirements, and monitor and evaluate those existing and implemented plans. So it's a very good place for us to utilize this policy flexibility and authority that we have so that we can help participants get everything set up, develop those management plans, and then help them carry it through implementation, design, monitoring, the effectiveness of the conservation plan. So we do plan to have an allocation set aside initially in order to put a good and important priority on these for fiscal year 2025. Next slide, please. So lastly, and likely most importantly for everyone, what are our application cutoff dates? So of course, you all know we accept applications year round on a continuous basis, but we do process them for funding based upon our established deadlines. And you heard Marcus mention that this year for 25, we'll be announcing all of our deadlines up front. So we do have those established and they will be going out for public notice very soon. So October the 4th, we will have our cutoff date for sign up one. So any application received on or before October the 4th will be considered in our first round of funding. And then again, January the 10th of 2025, we will have a second sign up application cutoff date. So anything from October the 5th through January the 10th will be evaluated through a secondary round of funding. And then our Act Now for CPA DIA CMAs will be available through March the 28th for what is being referred to as their round one funding. So any CPA DIA CMA application received between now and March the 28th will be evaluated for that first round of funding, as long as it is over that established threshold. We potentially could have an additional third round, but it's always really a good idea, as others have said, to go ahead and come in earlier in the year, make yourself available for that funding in that first round. We will be receiving, like we said, similar to what we received in 2024 for 2025, which is historically a higher than what we have averaged in previous years. But you never know. The longer you wait, the less likely it is that funding will be available. So just encourage those that are reaching out to you to get in as quickly as they can, begin working with our field staff so that we have plenty of time to develop those conservation plans and get those applications processed and across the line according to our established dates. So I believe that is my last slide. So I will turn it back over to you, Jeremy.
All right, thank you so much. And yeah, I will be publishing the press releases for our deadlines today, tomorrow, and Friday. There's like 5 separate releases based on the programs. Nobody wants 5 in their inbox in the same day. So we're going to space those out a little bit. ASAP will be up first today by close of business. EQIP, CSP, AMA, and Act Now tomorrow. And then the RCPPs will hit the streets on Friday. So we were really waiting on State Tech to make sure that you all got that information before the general public. So notice achieved. All right. Thank you so much, programs team. Marcus, did you have any wrap up for your programs team?
I don't know.
Okay.
Turn it over to the next agenda item.
All right, well, the next agenda item is to wrap up and ask any final questions or comments from our folks online or in the room. Becky, did you have any closing things you want to do before that, or?
I'll hold my remarks until we get through some questions or comments if we have any.
All right, so we'll take questions and comments up to 11:55 here and then give 5 minutes for Becky's closeout. So any of our partners online, how's the time? I can enable your microphones and cameras. Go ahead and raise your hands. Crickets.
All right.
Steve, looks like Steve has something in the room here.
Yeah, it's for either Don or it's Gabe, Chad, and Damon to touch base with Heidi S. Bjornson at UNH. She just received a massive agroforestry grant to establish practices, to trial practices, both at UNH and on the farm as well. So I think there's a great opportunity to incorporate NRCS into this process as well. So I just want to put that on the radar for you all. That's happening. It's happening right now. So.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I've been in touch with Alex Contasta about that as well. So she's involved in that project. And Gabe and I actually went out to the silvopasture establishment site last week at the UNH Organic Dairy and saw what was going on there. So exciting stuff. We saw the forest farming project as well out there. And so that was great to see. Thank you for making sure that we knew about it. So exciting to we need to connect a little further on that. So exciting to see that's going on.
All right, nothing else, from online or in the room, so
All right, I'll close us out here. So first, thanks to all of our partners there, for all of the updates that you provided today. It was exciting to hear how a lot of those just intertwine into the workings that we are doing, over here, within NRCS. You know, we're excited for 25. We're probably a little nervous as well, to have 2 years, with back-to-back funding, like we've not seen before is exciting. You know, I know Brooke and Tracy are excited that we're getting some actual Inflation Reduction Act dollars towards our easements. Our partners, our landowners out there have been really great about, coming in with different projects to make sure that we keep those lands protected, whether for ag production or for wetland and wildlife species out there. So excited for all of that is going on. The other thing I want to say, partners, is thank you. So many of you in the room as well as out there online, you help promote our services and our programs. And we could not have the impact that we're able to have with these Farm Bill dollars and Inflation Reduction Act dollars without you all. So thank you so much for that. We're looking forward to a great year. It's hard to believe that I'm saying we're looking forward to the next great year when it's in August. That seems a little off, but I think everyone knows our fiscal year starts October 1. And then, you know, we'll move into the calendar year. But just wanted to say thank you all for that. Looking forward to the agroforestry to see how that plays out across the state. With Damon too, you know, maybe a little nervous just to see. Just nervous because it's new. But we'll see how that is received. And some of the other changes that we've got going on there. So thank you to all of the team here today that presented, gave your updates, made sure that we're keeping our partners informed as to what we have going on well. And Jeremy, I think with that, we are set to convene again in October as a group.
correct. Our next state technical committee meeting has been published on our website, and we'll update the agenda as we get a little closer. But this is the site here, slated for October 23rd of 2024. So we'll be wheels up in the new fiscal year at that point.
And it'll be pumpkin spice season.
It will be pumpkin, you know it.
And apple. All right. Well, with that, Jeremy, thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended with us here in the room as well as in the virtual world. We really appreciate you.
All right, thanks, team. Enjoy what remains of your summer.